Hello everyone, thank you for tuning into the channel. On today's episode, I'm going to be making this desert terrain. It's a 5-piece set, and I'm going to be donating it to my favorite friendly local game shop, which is Heroes Comics and Gaming in Louisville. These are little foliage pieces that I found at the Dollar Tree, and I made a video about them. They inspired me to make some desert terrain. So I wanted to make something that was playable for a variety of different war games, from everything from Warhammer to Malifaux to Battletech, or even usable in D&D campaigns. So I went more with functionality versus a realism. And their cacti came in some really interesting shapes. Here is a combination of cacti and succulent. And my inspirations for these crafts were deserts in bloom. These are some images I found of the Sonoran Desert in the USA. And here is what I think is looks like a Bromeliad, which is technically not a desert plant. It's more of something you would see in a jungle. They have a little root system and absorb moisture through the air. And here's a succulent, which once again, I'm not really sure if you would find this plant in the desert, but here we go. This craft is fast, cheap, and easy, and it's also really nice to use as the modular pieces because they're stackable. This can easily convert to an underwater style terrain. Just swap out the plants for something from the aquarium department at your local pet shop. Maybe change the color scheme a little bit, but this will work really well. Here's a list of our ingredients for the crafting venture we're about to undertake. I've got some XPS insulation foam, some Army Painter Tufts, my dollar store plants. Here's the cacti, the succulents. They came in these little pots, but they pop right out, and you can just glue them into your terrain. I didn't paint them or anything. This is a XPS foam cutter, hot wire cutter, and this is another hot wire cutter from Woodland Scenics that I like to use. It's got a nice little button and it heats up instantly. Here are the paints that we're going to use. I've got 3 different types of browns, a dark, a medium, and a light. I've got my sealant, some tacky glue, and some paint brushes. And once again, some scrap pieces of the XPS foam. And we're going to need some Patio Paver. Here's a close-up of some of the plants I got from the dollar store, which I thought was a pretty good deal. They're not the most durable plants, but they'll work, and I figure once they get beat up at the game shop, I'll just swap them out with something else. These desert and jungle plants are not a bad deal for $1. To begin with, I decided to cut out my basic shapes for the sandy desert dune mound pieces of terrain that I'll be building. And for this, I used I don't really know what it is. It's some kind of foam cutter piece that I bought on Amazon, and it's kind of sketchy. It doesn't really have a brand name, but it does a really good job of cutting through foam like butter. Take a look at that. Just cut right through. I decided to use some other methods for cutting foam so folks could see that there are other ways to do it besides a Proxxon or a straight edge. This is a Woodland Scenics wire cutter, which I really love to use for beveling my edges to try and create more of a rounded shape. Now this does take a little while to do, but it's the look I want to go for, and I think with some miniatures games that people will be playing at the game shop, this will allow them to move up to the top of the hill with maybe not suffering too much of a movement penalty, which of course all varies depending on your game. But I think for this effect, I wanted to do more of a sand dune or a sand mound, some pieces of terrain, which, like I said, can easily swap out for some jungle terrain, because once again, that Bromeliad and that succulent, I don't really think that those are necessarily desert terrain. Succulents, I believe, can be in the desert, but Bromeliads are more of like a jungle terrain or a rainforest terrain. They have a small root system, and they absorb moisture through the air, and they also have their foliage designed to catch dew and rainforest rains, which happen about once a day. They have little cups designed to catch drops of water, but I digress in my plants. So once you have those cut, bam, cut out as many pieces as you want for your tabletop terrain. I decided to make a bunch of different shapes and sizes for the game shop. And you can see I kind of chopped them up a little bit. And this piece right here just needed to have a face drawn in to go with that beautiful smile. So I kind of did a little bit of a little turtle nose or something. Next up is the Arlene's Tacky Glue, America's favorite craft glue. And if you've watched some of my other videos, you think you should know what's coming. We're going to put some glue down and then add some of this Patio Paver I got from the hardware store, which has a variety of grit and provides a really nice texture for the terrain pieces. Here's just a cheap brush I use from the dollar store or the hardware store. And just take that glue. What we're going to do is take that glue and just slap it on all of our terrain pieces everywhere that I want that Patio Paver. So that basically means everywhere on this mound, because I want it to create the illusion of having a hill, which will not only block sight for the tabletop games that the people will be using this to play with, but will also allow the characters or the miniatures to come on top of the mound to get a better line of sight. So here we go. Apply that Arlene's Tacky Glue to all your pieces of XPS foam, all your mounds. And once you have that done, get out your Patio Paver or sand or any kind of grit that you have and just pour that on top of the glue. This is going to be the first layer of adhesion that we're going to do. And then the next thing we're going to do is seal it. And then by the third layer of the acrylic paint that we'll be putting on top, that should seal in most and all of the sand. Now, there will be a couple loose pieces that will pop off, but that's just part of the process and what happens. So this, I really enjoy doing. It gets a little messy, but I've been crafting outside lately because it has the best light possible. And, there was just a cat butt that went in the bottom of that right-hand screen. So yeah, carry on. The next step is to go ahead and do this for all the other pieces that you would like to make for this project. After putting the Patio Paver on all my pieces, here's a shot of what everything looked like. And I just let this outside in the sun sit out there and dry, and pulled my little cacti pieces together for the next step. So here's a shot of what everything looks like as it's drying. And here's Miss Joan Collins. Mine. She's marking the box as her territory. Once everything was dry, it's time to add my sealant. And I'll go ahead and put a card up top with a link to my recipe for the sealant. It's pretty easy and simple. This adds a layer of adhesion to your texture to keep it from flaking off during gameplay. It also hardens and protects your foam. Here's what it looks like all wet. Now, the liquid and concoction will actually seep into the terrain piece, and here's what it looks like when it's dry. You can see it preserves all that great texture from the Patio Paver, and especially those larger chunky rocks, which will look great once we decide to go ahead and dry brush this piece. The base coat I wanted to go with is this clearance paint that I've used in some other tutorials. It's called Cocoa Bean. It's a Craft Smart paint. It's just an inexpensive acrylic paint. It's more of a darker brown. So I got my cheap brushes, shook up the paint, and applied the Cocoa Bean color brown to all the terrain pieces. Here's a shot of what everything looks like, and if you notice, I let some of the black show through. I didn't really necessarily hide all the black. I think that adds a nice little bit of extra layer of depth to the piece. And I did this on a rainy day, and here's an example of the wetness while I make a desert. It's kind of interesting that I was doing this in the rain, which meant that I had lots of coffee. And one of the key ingredients, I think, to dry brushing is that cup of coffee. Once everything is dry, the next color I went with was my medium brown. I didn't really go a full-on dry brush. It's kind of between a dry brush and a full brush of paint, just to get a little layer of color. Here's an example of where we came from and where we're headed to. I think I'm going to do here's a side-by-side, a before on the left and an after on the right. This layer dried, and as you can see, once again, I'm letting that black show through. So if you're looking at this piece right now, I've got three colors. I've got my black, my dark brown, and my medium brown. But I want to add another layer just to give it a little more pop, and that's where we're going to add our light brown and do a little bit of dry brushing. This will just make that texture pop up and recede from the background just a little bit more. Here's the paint I decided to choose for my light brown. It's a apple barrel. It's a khaki of some sort, so just basically any kind of tan or a light brown. And for this, I did go more of a dry brush technique because I didn't want to cover up all those layers that we have just spent creating. And here's what everything looks like when it's all finished. You can see how the tan, the khaki, really picks up the corners, which I used the Woodland Scenics hot wire cutter to make those edges, which I think just really adds a nice little depth. And the next step is to go ahead and add this foliage that I got from the Dollar Tree, the artificial plants. And we're going to use America's favorite craft glue. Arlene's been rocking this since God knows what year. And so just poked a hole with the back end of a paintbrush, put in some glue, and then put in my artificial plants from the Dollar Tree. Now, some of these were a little more tricky than others, like the cacti, which were more like a styrofoam, and then the succulents were actually plastic. So if this does not hold, I may have to come back and do a little touch-ups for the game shop. Once again, this is going to a public game shop, so stuff gets roughed up a little bit. Now, I wanted to add a little more color to the dryness of the terrain, and so I went with this yellow green with a little bit of red in there flock to add the blooming element of the desert in bloom. Since the cacti had flowers on it, I figured it was that season of the year. And this just finishes off the look and adds a little bit more of interest, I think, to the terrain piece. It's completely optional. Then next, I decided to add some of these Army Painter brand tufts of foliage, and I just mixed and matched. I had some that were not, none of these really said they were for a desert terrain. I had some that had some yellow flowers on them, and then I had some that looked kind of dried out. So I just went ahead and put those on there for a little more detailing to the terrain piece. And thank you for watching. I hope you learned something from this tabletop crafting tutorial. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and hit that notification bell. Thank you very much and have a great one.